At my sister's engagement party, yes, to my ex-fiancé, Justice Nathaniel Thornfield of the Supreme Court pulled me aside, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You know what, Camilla? You are justice, and justice always prevails in the end." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I smiled, raised my champagne glass to the room full of people celebrating my betrayal, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well then, Your Honor, let me show everyone what real justice looks like." My name is Camilla Rosewood, and if you're watching this, stay with me because have you ever realized that sometimes the people who steal from you actually hand you the keys to your own kingdom? See, what nobody at that party knew, not my backstabbing sister Delphine, not my snake of an ex-fiancé Harrison Thornfield, not even his powerful Supreme Court Justice father, was that I had been the invisible architect behind the Thornfield family's most celebrated legal victories for the past 3 years. Every landmark case, every brilliant legal strategy, every piece of research that made Harrison look like a legal prodigy at the prestigious law firm of Sterling and Associates in downtown Meridian City. It all came from my mind, my late nights, my relentless work. While Harrison was out schmoozing at charity galas and networking events, taking all the credit and building his reputation as the golden boy of constitutional law, I was the one burning the midnight oil in our shared apartment in the historic Riverside District. I was the ghostwriter of his success, the silent partner in his achievements, the invisible foundation upon which his entire career was built. But here's the part that makes this whole story absolutely insane. I wasn't even a lawyer yet. I was still finishing my final year at Meridian University Law School, working as his research assistant while he was already 3 years deep into his career at his daddy's old firm. Everyone thought I was just the supportive law student girlfriend, grateful to be dating someone so accomplished, so connected, so destined for greatness. What they didn't know was that Harrison could barely draft a grocery list without my help, let alone construct the complex constitutional arguments that were making him famous. When he landed the Morrison versus State case, the religious freedom case that made national headlines, guess who actually wrote the entire brief? When he successfully argued the landmark privacy rights case of Chen versus Digital Corp that got him featured on the cover of Legal Tribune magazine, guess who stayed up for 72 hours straight researching precedents and crafting the winning strategy? Me. All me. Always me. I told myself I was investing in our future together, that when I graduated, we'd be partners in every sense of the word, that my name would eventually be on those cases, that we would build something incredible together. Harrison promised me we'd open our own practice after we got married, that it would be Thornfield and Rosewood, constitutional law specialists. He even had business cards designed with both of our names on them as an engagement gift. I was so naive, so blindly in love, so desperately wanting to believe that love meant sacrifice, that relationships meant lifting each other up, that what was his was ours and what was mine was ours too. But my sister Delphine, she saw something entirely different. She saw a successful man with connections, with a Supreme Court justice for a father, with a corner office and a trust fund and a future that sparkled like the diamond engagement ring I wore on my finger for 8 months. She didn't see the late nights I spent crafting his success. She just saw the finished product and decided she wanted it for herself. The betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, calculated theft that played out over 6 months. It started with Delphine suddenly showing interest in Harrison's work, asking innocent questions about his cases during family dinners. Then she began showing up at the law firm, bringing him coffee and claiming she was just in the neighborhood. She started joining us at legal networking events, always perfectly dressed, always charming, always making sure to stand just a little too close to him in photos. I watched it happen in real time, but convinced myself I was being paranoid. Harrison reassured me that Delphine was just being supportive, that she was proud of our success, that family bonds were important.
When I expressed concern about how often she was texting him, he told me I was being insecure. When I noticed how his eyes followed her across the room at parties, he said I was imagining things. The night I found them together in our apartment, the one I helped pay for with my research assistant stipend, they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Harrison was showing her the brief I had written for the upcoming Valdez versus City Council case, the one that would determine the future of municipal law in our state. They were curled up on our couch, sharing wine I had bought, discussing my legal theories like they were his original thoughts.
"Camilla," Harrison said, when he saw me standing in the doorway, my keys still in my hand, my world crashing down around me. "We need to talk." That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since he told me that what he and Delphine had was real love, that what we had was just comfortable habit. 3 weeks since my own sister looked me in the eye and said, "You'll understand someday. When you find real love, you'll understand why we had to follow our hearts." 3 weeks since they announced their engagement to our family, who celebrated like it was the most natural thing in the world. 3 weeks since my parents said they were so happy for them and asked me to be the bigger person and support my sister's happiness. 3 weeks since I realized that I had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and I was about to make a move that would change the entire game. Because here's what none of them knew as they planned their perfect little engagement party in the rooftop garden of the Thornfield family estate in Willowbrook Heights. I had been documenting everything. Every email I wrote for Harrison, every strategy I developed, every brilliant legal argument that came from my mind and ended up filed under his name. Every late night when I solved the puzzles that made him look like a genius in court. And Justice Nathaniel Thornfield, in all his Supreme Court wisdom, was about to learn what real justice looked like when it was served ice cold by the woman his son had underestimated. But first, I had a party to attend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Harrison and Delphine didn't know as they celebrated their whirlwind romance was that I had been secretly building the most comprehensive legal portfolio any law student had ever assembled. Not for school, for survival, for proof. For the day I knew would eventually come when someone would try to steal credit for my work. You see, 3 years ago, when I first started helping Harrison with his cases, I made a decision that would save my entire future. I documented everything. Every single email I sent him with legal research, every strategy memo I wrote, every brief I drafted, every late-night phone call where I walked him through complex constitutional arguments that he couldn't grasp on his own. I didn't do it because I didn't trust him. I did it because my law professor, Dr. Evelyn Blackwater, had pulled me aside during my first semester and said something that haunted me. "Camilla, you have one of the most brilliant legal minds I've ever encountered, but brilliance means nothing if you can't prove it's yours. In this profession, especially for women, you need to protect your intellectual property like it's gold, because to the right people, it's worth more than gold." So I created what I called my insurance policy, a private server where I backed up every single piece of work I ever did for Harrison. Time-stamped drafts showing the evolution of my ideas, email threads where I corrected his misunderstandings of basic legal principles, voice recordings of our study sessions where I explained concepts he should have learned in his first year of law school. But it went deeper than that. I had been secretly collaborating with some of the most respected legal minds in the country, all while Harrison thought I was just his devoted girlfriend doing basic research. Professor Blackwater had introduced me to her network of constitutional law experts, and I had been consulting with them on the complex cases that Harrison couldn't handle alone. The Morrison versus State Religious Freedom case that made Harrison famous, I didn't just write the brief, I spent 2 weeks at the Constitutional Law Institute in Washington, D.C., working with former Supreme Court clerks to develop a groundbreaking argument strategy. Harrison thought I was visiting my aunt in the Capitol. He had no idea I was sitting in conference rooms with some of the most brilliant legal minds in America, crafting the very arguments that would make his career. The Chen versus Digital Court privacy rights case that got him on magazine covers, I had been in direct communication with leading privacy law experts at Stanford University and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The winning argument that Harrison delivered in court was actually the result of a collaborative effort between me and 3 of the nation's top constitutional scholars. I had built an invisible network of legal expertise that Harrison never knew existed. What made it even incredible was that these legal experts knew exactly who I was. They knew my name, my ideas, my potential. Dr. Blackwater had been sharing my work with my permission and proper attribution to her colleagues across the country. I wasn't just some law student helping her boyfriend. I was being recognized as an emerging constitutional law prodigy by people who actually mattered in the legal world.
Professor Blackwater had even been quietly recommending me for prestigious clerkship positions. 3 federal judges had already expressed interest in having me as their clerk after graduation, including Judge Patricia Fairmont of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who specifically requested to meet with me because she was so impressed with my constitutional analysis in what she thought was original scholarship I had written. But Harrison didn't know any of this. To him, I was just his supportive girlfriend who was good at research. He never asked where my insights came from. He never questioned how I could develop such sophisticated legal arguments so quickly. He just took my work, put his name on it, and presented it to the world as his own genius. The most devastating part? I had been offered a full scholarship to transfer to Harvard Law School 2 years ago. Professor Blackwater had recommended me personally to the dean based on my exceptional analytical work in constitutional law. But Harrison begged me to stay. He said we were a team, that he needed me, that we would build our future together in Meridian City. I turned down Harvard Law School for a man who was already planning to replace me with my own sister. What Harrison and Delphine also didn't know was that I had been receiving job offers from top law firms across the country. Not as a new graduate looking for entry-level positions, but as someone whose work had already made waves in the legal community. The senior partners at Constitutional Defense Group in New York had been trying to recruit me for months. They thought the brilliant legal mind behind the Morrison and Chen cases was some established lawyer, not a law student who hadn't even graduated yet. I had been living a double life. On the surface, I was the devoted girlfriend supporting her successful fiancé. But in reality, I was an emerging legal powerhouse with connections and opportunities that Harrison could only dream of. I had been invited to speak at constitutional law conferences. I had been asked to contribute to law review articles. I had been building a reputation in legal circles that would have shocked everyone who thought I was just Harrison's helper. The most ironic part of all, while my sister was stealing what she thought was a successful man with a bright future, she was actually stealing a fraud whose entire career was built on work he could never replicate. Without me, Harrison was just another mediocre lawyer with a famous last name and no original thoughts. But Delphine didn't know that the real prize, the real legal mind, the real future, the real power had been sitting right across from her at family dinners for the past 3 years. She thought she was stealing my man, my life, my happiness. What she had actually done was set me free to claim what was already mine. And Justice Nathaniel Thornfield, despite all his years on the Supreme Court, despite all his legal experience and wisdom, had no idea that the woman he had just called Justice was about to teach his entire family what that word really meant. What nobody understood about my relationship with Harrison was the price I had been paying for his success. Not just the intellectual labor, though that was enormous,
but the complete erasure of my own identity, my own dreams, my own voice in service of building a man who never deserved it. For 3 years, I had been living like a ghost in my own life. While Harrison attended glamorous legal conferences where he presented my work, I stayed home, claiming I was too busy with school to join him. The truth was, he never invited me. He was terrified that someone might ask me a question about constitutional law and discover that I knew more than he did about his own cases. I remember the night of the American Bar Association's Young Lawyers Award ceremony, where Harrison was being honored for innovative constitutional advocacy based on the Morrison case, my Morrison case. I watched the live stream from our cramped apartment, eating takeout Chinese food alone while he walked the red carpet with his parents. When reporters asked him about his inspiration for the groundbreaking religious freedom argument, he talked about his rigorous personal study and his natural intuition for constitutional interpretation. I threw up in our bathroom that night, not from the cheap lo mein, but from watching the man I loved take credit for the work that had consumed 6 months of my life. The work that had given me migraines from staring at legal texts until 3 a.m. The work that had made me miss my own grandmother's funeral because I was on a deadline to finish the brief that would make Harrison a star.
Yes, I missed my grandmother's funeral for his career. Grandma Rose had raised me after my parents divorced when I was 12. She was the one who bought me my first legal textbook when I told her I wanted to be a lawyer. She was the one who believed in me when nobody else did. And when she died suddenly of a heart attack, I was locked in the law library, frantically researching 14th Amendment precedents for a case Harrison claimed he couldn't crack without my help. "You can't miss this deadline, Cam," he had said when I told him about Grandma Rose's death. "The client is expecting the brief on Monday. Your grandmother would understand. She'd want you to prioritize your future." Our future, he meant. But it felt like I was building his future and sacrificing mine. I missed her funeral to finish work that Harrison would later claim was his own brilliant breakthrough in constitutional law. I missed saying goodbye to the woman who taught me that intelligence was my greatest asset, so that a man could pretend my intelligence was his. The financial cost was crushing, too, but not in the way you might think. See, Harrison came from money, Supreme Court justice money, but he was also incredibly reckless with it. His father had cut him off financially after law school, claiming it would build character and teach him the value of hard work. What it actually taught Harrison was how to rely on me to keep us afloat while he spent his entry-level lawyer salary on expensive suits and networking dinners. I was working 3 part-time jobs while finishing law school. I tutored undergrad students in constitutional law for $15 an hour. I worked weekend shifts at the campus legal aid clinic for barely above minimum wage, and I freelanced as a research assistant for other law students who needed help with their papers, charging them for the same kind of work I was giving Harrison for free. Every penny I made went toward keeping us stable while Harrison invested in his image. The expensive suits, the luxury watch, the lease on his BMW, the membership to the exclusive Riverside Country Club where all the senior partners played golf, I was subsidizing all of it. Harrison convinced me it was our investment in our future, that his success would eventually benefit both of us. But here's the part that still makes my blood boil. I was living on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches while Harrison took clients to $200 dinners at Chez Laurent, the fanciest restaurant in Meridian City. I was shopping at thrift stores while he bought $500 shirts. I was walking to school to save on gas while he filled up his BMW tank twice a week. I told myself it was temporary, that when we got married, when we opened our practice together, when my name was finally on the letterhead, it would all balance out. I was investing in our partnership, our shared future, our combined success. What I was actually doing was funding my own replacement.
Because while I was sacrificing everything, my time, my money, my relationships, my health, my final moments with my grandmother, Harrison was using the success I had built for him to charm my sister. He was taking her to those expensive dinners I couldn't afford. He was impressing her with the corner office that my work had earned him. He was wooing her with the confidence that came from being praised for my ideas. I had made him attractive to her by making him successful. I had built the very foundation that allowed him to steal my sister's heart using resources and achievements that were rightfully mine. The emotional cost was even worse. For 3 years, I had silenced my own voice so completely that I sometimes forgot what my own opinions sounded like. In law school classes, when professors asked questions I knew I could answer brilliantly, I hesitated. I second-guessed myself. I had spent so long channeling my thoughts through Harrison, presenting my ideas as his ideas, that I had lost confidence in my own intellectual authority. My classmates started to think I was mediocre. My professors, except for Dr. Blackwater, who knew the truth, couldn't understand why my class participation was so tentative when my written work was so exceptional. I was failing to advocate for myself in the very field where advocacy was everything. I had been so busy making Harrison look like a genius that I had made myself invisible. At networking events, I introduced myself as Harrison Thornfield's fiancé instead of Camilla Rosewood, law student. When people asked about my interests, I talked about Harrison's cases. When they asked about my plans after graduation, I talked about supporting Harrison's career. I had erased myself so thoroughly that when Delphine started showing interest in Harrison, I couldn't even articulate why I deserved him more than she did. After all, what had I accomplished that anyone could see? What success could I point to that had my name on it? Harrison had my work, my ideas, my strategy, my future career trajectory, but the world only saw his name on it. Delphine saw a successful lawyer with prestigious cases and a bright future. She didn't see the woman behind the curtain who had written every word of that success.
But the worst sacrifice of all was the relationships I had destroyed in service of Harrison's career. I had canceled plans with friends so many times that they stopped inviting me places. I had missed family gatherings, birthday parties, and important moments because I was always working on Harrison's next case. I had isolated myself so completely that when the betrayal happened, I realized I had no one to call, no one to confide in, no support system left. Except for Dr. Blackwater, who had been watching this destruction with growing concern for months. Camilla, she had said to me just 2 weeks before I found Harrison and Delphine together, "You're disappearing. The brilliant woman I met 3 years ago is fading away, and I'm afraid that when you finally realize what's happening, there won't be enough of you left to fight back." She was wrong about one thing, though. There was still enough of me left to fight back. There was enough of me left to remind everyone what justice really looked like. The engagement party was supposed to be my final humiliation, the moment when Harrison and Delphine would cement their victory over me in front of everyone who mattered. What they didn't expect was that it would become the moment I finally remembered who I was and who I had always been capable of becoming. The party was held at the Thornfield family estate in Willowbrook Heights, a sprawling mansion that screamed old money and legal dynasties. Justice Nathaniel Thornfield had spared no expense for his son's engagement to my sister. There were white roses everywhere, a string quartet playing classical music, and enough champagne to float a yacht. The guest list read like a who's who of Meridian City's legal elite. Federal judges, senior partners from every major law firm, state Supreme Court justices, and even a few attorneys general from neighboring states. I almost didn't go. Dr. Blackwater had offered to let me stay at her house for the weekend to spare myself the torture of watching my life be celebrated as someone else's triumph. But something inside me, call it pride, call it masochism, call it destiny, insisted that I needed to be there. I needed to see this through to whatever end was waiting for me. I arrived exactly 30 minutes after the party started, wearing a simple black dress that I had bought 3 years ago for my first law school formal.
It was the only dress I owned that wasn't borrowed or purchased from a thrift store. I had done my own hair and makeup, and I carried a small clutch that contained nothing but my phone, my keys, and a single item that would change everything. The moment I walked through the French doors onto the estate's terrace, conversation stopped. Not because I looked particularly stunning, though I held my head high and walked with purpose, but because my presence was unexpected. Delphine had told everyone I was too heartbroken to attend. Harrison had spread the word that I was still processing the situation and needed space to come to terms with their happiness. They had painted me as the tragic figure, the bitter ex-fiancé who couldn't handle being replaced by someone better. They had prepared everyone to see me as pathetic, jealous, and defeated. Instead, I walked in looking calm, composed, and completely unbroken. Delphine spotted me first. She was standing near the fountain in a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition, her engagement ring, my former engagement ring, catching the light as she gestured while talking to Judge Patricia Fairmont. Yes, the same Judge Fairmont who had been trying to recruit me for a clerkship based on my constitutional law work. "Camilla," she called out, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she had perfected over the years. "You're so glad you decided to come. I wasn't sure if you'd feel up to it." The crowd turned to watch this reunion, and I could feel their collective breath held in anticipation. They were waiting for the drama, the breakdown, the emotional explosion that would confirm their expectations of the scorned woman. Instead, I smiled. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Delphine. After all, this is such a momentous occasion. Harrison appeared at Delphine's side, looking uncomfortable, but trying to project confidence. He was wearing a navy suit that I had helped him pick out for his first court appearance on the Morrison case, the case that had launched his career using my work. "Camilla," he said, extending his hand as if we were meeting for the first time, "thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy, but it means a lot that you're supporting us." I stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then deliberately ignored it. "Oh, Harrison, I'm not here to support you. I'm here to see justice served." Justice Nathaniel Thornfield had been watching this exchange from across the terrace, and now he approached us with the measured steps of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. He was shorter than I had expected, but his presence was undeniable. This was a man who had shaped constitutional law for 2 decades, who had written opinions that would outlive us all.
"Miss Rosewood," he said, his voice carrying the authority of the highest court in the land. "I'm Justice Thornfield. I've heard so much about you." "Have you?" I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "And what exactly have you heard?" He paused, clearly not expecting such directness. "Well, that you and Harrison had a meaningful relationship, and that you've been instrumental in his early career development." The word instrumental hung in the air like a loaded gun. I could see Harrison's face tighten, could see Delphine's eyes dart between us nervously. They had no idea what Harrison might have told his father about our relationship, about my role in his success. "Instrumental," I repeated slowly. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." Judge Fairmont had been listening to this conversation with growing interest, and now she stepped forward. "Camilla Rosewood, the Camilla Rosewood who wrote that brilliant analysis on religious freedom jurisprudence? Dr. Blackwater shared your work with our chambers last year. We've been hoping to meet you." The look of confusion that flashed across Harrison's face was priceless. He had no idea that Judge Fairmont knew my name, knew my work, had been impressed by my legal mind. In his version of reality, I was just his supportive girlfriend who helped with research. "Judge Fairmont," I said, extending my hand with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. "It's an honor to meet you. I've followed your opinions on constitutional privacy rights with great admiration. Your analysis of the Morrison case was particularly insightful. The way you connected historical precedent with modern application was masterful. We don't often see such sophisticated constitutional thinking from someone so early in their career. I felt Harrison go very still beside me. The Morrison case. My Morrison case. Judge Fairmont was praising my analysis of my own work that the entire legal community believed belonged to Harrison. I'm glad you found it valuable. Constitutional law is my passion. Justice Thornfield was now looking at me with renewed interest. You wrote an analysis of the Morrison case? She's being modest. Dr. Blackwater shared several pieces of Camilla's scholarship with our constitutional law discussion group. Her work on the Chen privacy case was equally impressive. We've been hoping to convince her to consider a clerkship with the Ninth Circuit after graduation. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison's face had gone completely white. Delphine was looking back and forth between me and Harrison with growing confusion. Justice Thornfield was studying me with the sharp attention of a man who had just realized he was missing crucial information. The Chen case. Justice Thornfield said slowly, "You analyzed the Chen case." "Among others," I replied simply. "Harrison," Justice Thornfield turned to his son, "you never mentioned that Miss Rosewood had been analyzing your cases. What an interesting collaboration." I could see Harrison struggling to find words, to spin this revelation in a way that wouldn't expose the truth. But before he could speak, I opened my small clutch and pulled out the single item I had brought with me. A business card. Simple, elegant, expensive cardstock. It read, "Camilla Rosewood, Juris Doctor Candidate, Constitutional Law Specialist," with my phone number and email address below. I handed it to Justice Thornfield with a smile. "In case you're ever in need of constitutional analysis, Your Honor, I'm always happy to put my expertise to work for justice." The word justice carried special weight coming from me, directed at him in this moment. It was both a challenge and a promise. Justice Thornfield took the card and studied it carefully. Then he looked up at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect, or the dawning realization that there was much more to this story than his son had told him. "Miss Rosewood," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean in to listen. "You know what? You are justice, and justice always prevails in the end." The crowd had gone completely silent. Harrison looked like he was about to be sick. Delphine's face was a mask of confusion and growing panic. And I raised my champagne glass to the room full of people who had come to celebrate my betrayal and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well then, Your Honor, let me show everyone what real justice looks like." That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being the victim and started being the victor. That was the moment I remembered that I had never been the supporting character in this story. I had always been the hero, waiting for my moment to take center stage. The morning after the engagement party, I woke up in my studio apartment with a clarity I hadn't felt in 3 years. For the first time since I'd started ghostwriting Harrison's career, I knew exactly what I had to do. The conversation with Justice Thornfield and Judge Fairmont hadn't just been embarrassing for Harrison, it had been revelatory for me. These brilliant legal minds recognized my work, valued my intellect, and saw me as a peer, not an assistant.
I sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that actually tasted good for once. I had splurged on real beans instead of the instant powder I'd been surviving on. And I began to execute a plan that had been forming in my mind since the moment Justice Thornfield called me Justice. First, I opened my secure email account and composed a message to Dr. Blackwater. "Professor, I'm ready to accept every opportunity you've been holding for me.
all of them. Please schedule meetings with Judge Fairmont, the Constitutional Defense Group, and Harvard Law School's transfer office. Also, I need to meet with the law school's intellectual property office. It's time to protect my work. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then, I did something I should have done years ago. I called Harrison's direct supervisor at Sterling & Associates, senior partner Marcus Wellington. Harrison didn't know that I had Mr. Wellington's personal number, didn't know that we had been corresponding about constitutional law theory for the past 6 months. You see, Mr. Wellington had been so impressed with the innovative approach in Harrison's Morrison case that he had reached out to pick Harrison's brain about future constitutional challenges. Except every time Mr. Wellington called with complex questions, Harrison had to call me in a panic, get my analysis, then call Mr. Wellington back hours later with his thoughts. "Mr. Wellington," I said when he answered on the second ring, "this is Camilla Rosewood. I need to schedule a meeting with you today. It's regarding the Morrison and Chen cases, and I think you'll find what I have to share quite illuminating." There was a pause. "Miss Rosewood, yes, of course. Harrison has mentioned your helpful research assistance. I'd be happy to meet. How about this afternoon at 3? "Perfect. And Mr. Wellington, you might want to bring someone from your firm's ethics committee to this meeting. What I'm going to show you will require some very careful consideration about proper attribution of legal work." I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. "I see. Yes, I'll make sure ethics counsel is present. Should I be concerned about something specific?" "Let's just say that after today, you'll have a much clearer picture of who actually authored the strategic thinking behind your firm's most celebrated cases." The second call was to the dean of Meridian University Law School, Dean Patricia Crane. Dean Crane had always been supportive of my academic work, though she had expressed concern about my class participation and networking efforts. She had no idea that my energy had been funneled entirely into building Harrison's career instead of my own. "Dean Crane, this is Camilla Rosewood. I need to file a formal intellectual property complaint with the school's Academic Integrity Office. I have extensive documentation of legal work that has been improperly attributed to another person, work that has significantly impacted several high-profile constitutional law cases." "Camilla," Dean Crane's voice was careful, "these are serious allegations. Do you have substantial proof to support such a claim?" "I have 3 years' worth of time-stamped drafts, email correspondence, research notes, and voice recordings that establish clear authorship of legal arguments currently attributed to Harrison Thornfield. I also have witnesses from the academic community who can verify the original development of these ideas." "I see. Can you be in my office at 10 a.m.? I'll need to have the Academic Integrity Committee present for this conversation." "I'll be there. And, Dean Crane, you might want to contact the American Bar Association's Ethics Committee as well. If Harrison has been presenting my work as his own to clients and in court filings, this extends far beyond academic misconduct." My third call was the most emotionally difficult but strategically necessary. I called my parents. "Mom, it's Camilla. I need you and Dad to meet me for lunch today. There are some things about Harrison and Delphine's relationship that you need to understand before this goes any further." "Honey," my mother's voice was already defensive, "I know you're hurt, but Delphine and Harrison really do love each other. Sometimes these things just happen." "Mom, this isn't about love. This is about fraud. Harrison's entire career has been built on my work that I can prove belongs to me. Delphine didn't just steal my fiancé, she stole a man whose success exists only because of my labor. I'm about to expose that truth to the legal community, and I thought you should hear it from me first." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Camilla, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that every case that made Harrison famous, every achievement that impressed Delphine, every reason she thought he was such a catch, it all came from my mind, my research, my legal arguments, and I have proof." My final call was to Judge Fairmont's chambers. Her clerk, a sharp woman named Rebecca, who had graduated from Meridian Law 2 years ahead of me, answered immediately. "Camilla Rosewood," she said warmly. "Judge Fairmont has been hoping you'd call. She was quite impressed with your conversation at the party last night." "Rebecca, I need to schedule an urgent meeting with Judge Fairmont. I have information about the constitutional cases she's been praising that she needs to hear before she makes any personnel decisions or professional recommendations."
How urgent are we talking? Today, if possible. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how the legal community views several landmark constitutional arguments, and Judge Fairmont has been considering people for positions based on work that was improperly attributed. Hold on. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Then Rebecca returned. "Judge Fairmont can see you at 4:30 this afternoon. She's very intrigued by your call." With my meeting scheduled, I turned to the most important task of the day, preparing my evidence. I had been meticulous in my documentation, but now I needed to organize it for maximum impact. I created separate folders for each case: Morrison versus State, Chen versus Digital Corp., and the 3 smaller cases that had established Harrison's reputation as a rising constitutional law star. For each case, I compiled time-stamped email drafts showing the evolution of my legal arguments, voice recordings of conversations where I explained constitutional theory to Harrison, research notes in my handwriting with dates predating Harrison's case filings, email threads with Professor Blackwater and other legal experts where I discussed my developing theories, screenshots of my late-night research sessions documented by my library access logs. But the most damning evidence was something Harrison didn't even know existed. For the past 2 years, I had been automatically backing up our shared computer to my personal cloud storage. Every document Harrison had worked on, every draft he had modified, every email he had sent, I had complete records showing his process. And what those records revealed was devastating. Harrison's contributions to his own cases were limited to changing fonts, correcting basic grammar, and occasionally rearranging paragraphs. The substantive legal content, the innovative arguments, the constitutional analysis, it was all mine, and the digital trail proved it beyond any doubt. I printed everything. 3 copies of every document, every email, every piece of evidence. 1 set for Dean Crane, 1 set for Mr. Wellington, and 1 set for Judge Fairmont. By the time I finished, I had 3 banker's boxes full of proof that Harrison Thornfield was a fraud and that I was the real constitutional law mind behind his career. But I wasn't done yet. I had 1 more preparation to make, and this one was for my own future rather than Harrison's destruction. I opened my laptop and began writing, not a legal brief this time, but a resignation letter, because after today, I wouldn't be Harrison's silent partner anymore. I wouldn't be the invisible woman behind the celebrated lawyer. I wouldn't be the ghostwriter of someone else's success. "Dear Harrison," I typed, "effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as your uncredited legal consultant, unpaid research assistant, and intellectual property provider. Please consider this formal notice that I will no longer be available to write your briefs, develop your arguments, or solve your cases. You will need to find another source for your legal insights, as mine are no longer available to you. As you begin your marriage to my sister, you'll be pleased to know that your honeymoon period will coincide perfectly with your first opportunity to demonstrate your individual legal capabilities. I wish you the best of luck in discovering what those might be. Sincerely, Camilla Rosewood, JD candidate and constitutional law specialist." I printed the letter on my personal letterhead. Yes, I had letterhead now. I had ordered it that morning. And sealed it in an envelope addressed to Harrison at Sterling & Associates. Then I got dressed for the most important day of my legal career. Not in a borrowed dress or thrift store find, but in a sharp navy suit that I had bought with money from my tutoring job, money that I had finally decided to spend on myself instead of Harrison's image. As I walked out of my apartment building into the bright Meridian City morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Excitement about my own future. Today wasn't just about exposing Harrison's fraud or getting justice for his betrayal. Today was about reclaiming my own voice, my own career, my own brilliant legal mind that I had been hiding for too long. Today was the day Camilla Rosewood stopped being invisible and started being inevitable. My first meeting was at 10 a.m. with Dean Crane and the Academic Integrity Committee. I arrived at the law school's administration building carrying one of my banker's boxes, wearing my new Navy suit, and the confidence of someone who had finally decided to fight back. The conference room was intimidating. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and portraits of distinguished alumni who had shaped legal history. But I belonged here now, not as Harrison's shadow, but as myself. Dean Crane introduced me to Dr. Michael Stevenson, chair of the Academic Integrity Committee, and Professor Sarah Chen, the law school's intellectual property expert. Dr. Stevenson was a stern man in his 60s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, while Professor Chen seemed genuinely intrigued by what I might reveal. Ms. Rosewood, Dean Crane began, these are extraordinary allegations you're making. Before we proceed, I need to understand the scope of what you're claiming. Are you alleging that Mr. Thornfield has plagiarized your academic work?
No, I said, opening my banker's box with deliberate care. I'm alleging something much more serious. I'm alleging that Harrison Thornfield has built his entire professional reputation on legal work that I authored, and that he has used that stolen reputation to secure employment, client relationships, and professional opportunities that rightfully belong to me. I pulled out the first folder, Morrison versus State, and placed it on the conference table. This case made Harrison famous. It was featured in Constitutional Law Quarterly, referenced in 3 federal court decisions, and led to his promotion at Sterling and Associates. Every single substantive legal argument in this case came from my research and analysis. Dr. Stevenson frowned. Miss Rosewood, it's not uncommon for law students to assist practicing attorneys with research. Collaboration doesn't necessarily constitute— This wasn't collaboration, I interrupted, pulling out a thick stack of time-stamped documents. This was intellectual theft. Let me show you exactly what I mean. I spread the evidence across the table like a prosecutor presenting a case to a jury. These are my original research notes, handwritten and dated 6 months before Harrison ever received the Morrison case. Here's my preliminary analysis of the religious freedom issues involved, uploaded to my private cloud storage with metadata showing the creation date. Here are email drafts where I outline the constitutional arguments, sent to myself as backup copies. Professor Chen leaned forward, studying the documents with growing interest. These appear to be comprehensive legal strategies, not simple research assistance. Because they are, I continued, pulling out more evidence. Here's the final brief that Harrison filed with the court, and here's my original draft. You'll notice that Harrison's only contributions were cosmetic, changing fonts, adjusting margins, and adding his name to the header. The legal reasoning, the case citations, the constitutional analysis, it's identical to my work, word for word. I opened my laptop and pulled up a split-screen comparison I had prepared. I've created a digital analysis showing the progression from my draft to the filed document. As you can see, 97% of the substantive content is unchanged from my original work. Dean Crane was now studying the documents with the focused attention of someone who realized this was much bigger than a simple academic dispute. Miss Rosewood, do you have similar evidence for other cases? I have evidence for every major case that established Harrison's reputation, I said, pulling out additional folders. Chen versus Digital Corp., the privacy rights case that got him featured on magazine covers. Rodriguez versus City Planning, the municipal law case that earned him the Young Lawyers Award. Jackson versus State Education Board, the case that prompted 3 different law firms to try to recruit him. I spread each case file across the table, creating a mosaic of evidence that told an undeniable story. For each case, I had the same pattern of proof: my original research, my preliminary analysis, my draft arguments, and Harrison's final filings that were virtually identical to my work except for formatting changes.
Dr. Stevenson was now fully engaged, his earlier skepticism replaced by obvious concern. Miss Rosewood, if what you're showing us is accurate, this represents one of the most extensive cases of intellectual property theft we've ever encountered. But I need to ask, why did you allow this to continue for so long? Because I was in love. And because Harrison convinced me that we were building something together, that my contributions would be recognized when we opened our joint practice after we got married. I trusted him completely, and he exploited that trust systematically. Professor Chen had been quietly reviewing the digital evidence on my laptop, and now she looked up with an expression of amazement. Camilla, this is extraordinary work. The constitutional analysis in the Morrison case is graduate-level scholarship. The privacy rights arguments in Chen versus Digital Corp are genuinely innovative. You didn't just help with these cases, you authored breakthrough legal theory, which is why legal experts across the country have been trying to recruit the person they thought was responsible for this work. Judge Patricia Fairmont of the Ninth Circuit has been attempting to offer Harrison a clerkship based on these cases. Constitutional Defense Group in New York has been pursuing him for a senior associate position. Harvard Law Review wanted to publish his analysis of modern privacy jurisprudence. Dean Crane sat back in her chair, the full implications becoming clear. Miss Rosewood, are you saying that Mr. Thornfield has been receiving professional opportunities based on work he didn't actually author? I'm saying that every opportunity Harrison has received in the past 3 years should have been offered to me. Every recognition, every award, every job offer, every speaking engagement, all of it was earned through my labor and my intellectual property. I pulled out one final piece of evidence that I had been saving for maximum impact. And here's the most damning proof of all. This is a recording of a conversation between Harrison and me from 2 months ago when he was preparing for the oral arguments in the Valdez versus City Council case.
I pressed play on my phone, and Harrison's voice filled the conference room. Cam, I don't understand the constitutional issues in this case at all. Can you walk me through the Fourth Amendment applications again? And that thing about substantive due process? I have no idea what that means or how it applies here. My voice responded, Harrison, we've gone over this 3 times. Substantive due process protects fundamental rights that aren't explicitly listed in the Constitution. In the Valdez case, you're arguing that the city's zoning restrictions violate the property owner's fundamental right to economic liberty. The recording continued for 15 minutes, with Harrison asking basic questions about constitutional law principles that any second-year law student should understand, and me patiently explaining concepts that would later appear in his brilliant oral arguments. When the recording ended, the conference room was silent. Professor Chen spoke first. Miss Rosewood, this recording suggests that Mr. Thornfield lacks basic understanding of the constitutional principles that supposedly make him such a talented lawyer. Because he does lack that understanding, I said. Harrison has been coasting on my work for so long that he's never developed his own legal analysis skills. Without my input, he's just another mediocre attorney with a famous last name. Dr. Stevenson was now taking detailed notes. Miss Rosewood, we'll need to conduct a formal investigation, but based on what you've presented today, we have grounds for serious academic misconduct charges. However, I'm concerned that the situation extends far beyond our jurisdiction. Mr. Thornfield's use of your work in professional settings may constitute fraud. Which is why I have meetings scheduled this afternoon with his supervising partner at Sterling & Associates and with Judge Fairmont, I said. The legal community needs to understand that they've been evaluating and rewarding the wrong person. Dean Crane leaned forward. Camilla, I have to ask, what do you want to achieve with these revelations? What's your end goal? I considered her question carefully. I want my work properly attributed. I want the opportunities that should have been offered to me. I want Harrison's fraudulent career exposed so that he can't continue to benefit from my intellectual property. And I want to ensure that no other law student ever gets exploited the way I was. And personally,
Professor Chen asked gently. "This must be incredibly painful given your relationship with Mr. Thornfield." I smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Actually, Professor, I'm grateful. Harrison's betrayal with my sister forced me to finally value my own work enough to protect it. If he hadn't shown me who he really was, I might have spent my entire career being his invisible partner." As I packed up my evidence and prepared to leave for my next meeting, Dr. Stevenson stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Rosewood, what you've presented today represents some of the most impressive legal scholarship we've seen from a current student. Regardless of what actions we take regarding Mr. Thornfield, I want you to know that this university should be proud to have you as a graduate." Walking across campus toward downtown Meridian City for my meeting with senior partner Wellington, I felt a strange sense of peace. For 3 years, I had been building Harrison's career while hiding my own light under a bushel. But evidence doesn't lie, and truth has a way of making itself known. By the end of this day, the legal community would know exactly who Camilla Rosewood was, and exactly who Harrison Thornfield wasn't. By 2:30 p.m., my phone started buzzing with urgent calls and texts that told me the first wave of my revelation was already making impact across Meridian City's legal community. But the most satisfying call came from an unexpected source: my sister, Delphine. "Camilla, what the hell is going on? Harrison just got called into an emergency meeting with his boss, and he looks like he's going to throw up. He won't tell me what's happening, but he keeps asking me if you've said anything to anyone about your research work for him." I was sitting in my car outside Sterling & Associates preparing for my 3 p.m. meeting with senior partner Wellington when Delphine called. Through the glass windows of the law firm's lobby, I could see Harrison pacing frantically near the elevators, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, I can see the sweat stains under his arms despite the building's air conditioning. "Research work," I repeated innocently. "Is that what he's calling it now?" "Camilla, I'm serious. He's acting completely unhinged. He called me crying, actually crying, saying that someone is trying to destroy his career with lies. What did you do?" The genuine confusion in Delphine's voice almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. She really had no idea that the successful lawyer she'd stolen from me was actually a fraud whose entire career depended on my hidden labor. "I didn't do anything, Delphine. I just started telling the truth." "What truth? What are you talking about?"
I could see Harrison through the window now, gesticulating wildly as he spoke to someone on his phone. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he kept pulling at his tie like it was choking him. The truth about who actually wrote every case that made Harrison famous? The truth about whose legal mind created the arguments that got him promoted, awarded, and featured in magazines. The truth about who's been supporting his career while he took all the credit. The silence on Delphine's end was so long, I thought she'd hung up. "Camilla," she finally said, her voice much smaller now, "are you saying that Harrison's case is—" "I'm saying that the man you fell in love with doesn't actually exist, Delphine. The brilliant lawyer, the constitutional law expert, the rising star of the legal community. That was all me, working in the shadows while he stood in the spotlight." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible. Harrison went to law school, he works at a prestigious firm, he argues cases in court." "Harrison repeats arguments that I write for him. He presents research that I compile for him. He takes credit for legal strategies that I develop for him. Remove my work from the equation, and Harrison Thornfield is just another mediocre lawyer trading on his father's reputation." Through the window, I watched Harrison suddenly stop pacing. He was staring at his phone with an expression of absolute terror. Someone had clearly just delivered very bad news. "Delphine," I continued, "I need you to ask yourself something. In all the time you've been getting to know Harrison, have you ever
Heard him discuss complex legal theory? Have you ever seen him work through a difficult constitutional problem? Have you ever watched him draft an original legal argument? Another long silence. He says legal work is boring to talk about outside the office. He says he likes to keep work and personal life separate. Or maybe he can't discuss legal work because he doesn't actually understand it well enough to have a casual conversation about it. My phone buzzed with another call. Dr. Blackwater. I could see she was calling from her office, probably because word was already spreading through the law school about my morning meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee. Delphine, I have to go, but here's some free advice. You might want to start asking Harrison some very specific questions about his legal expertise. Ask him to explain substantive due process. Ask him about the constitutional basis for privacy rights. Ask him to walk you through the legal reasoning behind any of his famous cases. And pay attention to whether he can actually answer or if he just changes the subject. I hung up and answered Dr. Blackwater's call. Camilla, her voice was urgent. I just got a call from Dean Crane. She said your evidence presentation this morning was extraordinary, but also that there might be some immediate consequences. Are you prepared for what's about to happen? I'm sitting outside Sterling and Associates right now, watching Harrison have what appears to be a complete nervous breakdown in their lobby. So yes, I think I'm prepared. Camilla, you need to understand that what you've set in motion is going to reverberate through the entire legal community. Senior partner Wellington called Judge Fairmont after your meeting was scheduled, trying to get information about your allegations. Judge Fairmont called me wanting to verify your academic credentials and the authenticity of your work. Word is spreading that one of the legal community's rising stars might be a fraud. Through the window, I saw Harrison suddenly sprint toward the elevators, apparently late for what was probably the most important meeting of his professional life. Professor, how quickly do you think news like this travels in legal circles? Faster than you might imagine. Constitutional law is a small community, especially at the highest levels. The same people who have been praising Harrison's work are the ones who will be most interested to learn that it might not actually be his. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Camilla, your father and I need to talk to you immediately. Delphine called us crying, saying you're trying to ruin Harrison's career with lies. This has gone too far. I showed Dr. Blackwater the text. Even my parents think I'm making this up. They won't think that much longer. Camilla, I need to tell you something. After Dean Crane called me about your evidence, I reached out to some colleagues who have been following your work, the work they thought belonged to Harrison. Dr. Robert Chen at Stanford, Professor Williams at Yale, Judge Martinez from the Second Circuit. They're all very interested in meeting the real author of the constitutional analysis they've been admiring. Meaning that by tomorrow, some of the most influential legal minds in the country are going to know your name and want to hire you. But they're also going to be very angry about being misled regarding the true authorship of work they've been citing and praising. I checked the time. 2:55 p.m. Time for my meeting with senior partner Wellington. Professor, I have to go, but thank you for believing in me enough to make those calls. Camilla, you don't need to thank me. Your work speaks for itself. It always has. The only difference now is that people will finally know who's actually speaking. I walked into the Sterling & Associates building with my second banker's box of evidence, past Harrison, who was now slumped in a lobby chair with his head in his hands. He looked up as I passed, and our eyes met for a moment. The confident, successful lawyer who had betrayed me was gone. In his place was a terrified man who had just realized that his house of cards was collapsing. "Camilla!" he called out desperately. "Please, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain." "No need to explain, Harrison. I'm about to do that for you." As I walked toward the elevator,
I heard him call after me, his voice cracking. "Camilla, please! You're destroying everything we built together!" I turned back to him one last time. "No, Harrison. I'm finally taking credit for everything I built alone." The elevator doors closed, carrying me up to the executive floor where senior partner Wellington was waiting with the firm's ethics committee to hear the truth about their star associate. Below me, Harrison remained in the lobby, probably trying to figure out how to explain to his fiancée, my sister, that the man she thought she was marrying existed only in my shadow. But that was his problem now. I had spent 3 years solving Harrison's problems. Today, I was finally solving my own. The Sterling & Associates conference room on the 42nd floor was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Meridian City skyline, while the mahogany table could easily seat 20 people. But today, only 5 of us were present: senior partner Marcus Wellington, ethics committee chair Diana Foster, associate general counsel Richard Stone, Harrison, and me. Harrison looked like he had aged 10 years since I had seen him in the lobby 20 minutes ago. His usual immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, his hair rumpled from running his hands through it, and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights since the engagement party. He kept glancing at the door as if calculating whether he could make a run for it. Mr. Wellington, a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, opened the meeting with characteristic directness. "Miss Rosewood, you've made some extraordinary allegations regarding Mr. Thornfield's work product. Given the seriousness of these claims and their potential impact on our firm's reputation, we need to examine your evidence with the utmost care." I placed my banker's box on the conference table and began methodically removing folders. "Mr. Wellington, what I'm about to show you will demonstrate that every case that established Harrison's reputation at this firm was authored by me. Not researched by me, not assisted by me, authored by me." Diana Foster, a sharp-eyed woman with steel gray hair, leaned forward. "Ms. Rosewood, that's an extremely serious allegation. Are you claiming that Mr. Thornfield committed fraud?" "I'm claiming that Mr. Thornfield has built his entire career on intellectual property theft, and that this firm has been unknowingly benefiting from my work while Harrison collected the credit, the salary, and the promotions." Harrison finally found his voice. "This is insane! Camilla, tell them about our partnership. Tell them how we work together as a team. This isn't theft. This was collaboration." I opened the Morrison versus State folder and spread the contents across the table. Let's start with the case that made Harrison's reputation. Mr. Wellington, you promoted Harrison to senior associate based largely on his work on this case, correct? That's correct. The Morrison case represented innovative constitutional thinking that positioned our firm as a leader in religious freedom law. Here's my original handwritten analysis of the Morrison case, dated 6 months before Harrison ever received the assignment. I placed the notebook on the table, opening to pages covered in my careful handwriting. Here's my preliminary research memo, uploaded to my cloud storage with timestamps. And here's the brief that Harrison filed with the court. I opened my laptop and displayed a side-by-side comparison on the room's large monitor. As you can see, Harrison's filed brief is virtually identical to my original draft. The only changes are cosmetic: font adjustments, margin formatting, and the addition of his name to the header. Richard Stone, the general counsel, was studying the documents with growing concern. Ms. Rosewood, this appears to show substantial similarity, but collaboration often results in... This isn't collaboration, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. This is Harrison asking me to explain basic constitutional law principles that any competent attorney should understand. I played the recording I had shared with the Academic Integrity Committee, Harrison's voice asking elementary questions about substantive due process, with me patiently explaining concepts that would later appear in his brilliant oral arguments.
The silence that followed was deafening.
Mr. Wellington's face had gone completely white. "Harrison," he said slowly, "is that your voice on the recording?" Harrison's response was barely a whisper. She's taking things out of context. Sometimes lawyers bounce ideas off each other." "Mr. Thornfield," Diana Foster's voice was ice cold, "substantive due process is a fundamental constitutional concept. You shouldn't need to have it explained to you by anyone, let alone a law student." I wasn't finished. I pulled out the Chen versus Digital Corp folder. This privacy rights case got Harrison featured on the cover of Legal Tribune magazine. It also prompted Judge Martinez from the Second Circuit to personally call this firm to praise Harrison's innovative legal thinking. I displayed another side-by-side comparison. Once again, Harrison's work is identical to my original analysis. But here's what's particularly interesting about this case. I developed the privacy rights arguments during a consultation with the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Stanford Law School's Privacy Research Center. I have email correspondence with their experts dated weeks before Harrison ever saw this case. I showed them the email threads where leading privacy law experts were discussing constitutional theory with me, not Harrison. Professor Williams from Yale was particularly effusive in her praise of my groundbreaking approach to digital privacy rights. "Harrison," Mr. Wellington said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "did you tell me that you developed these privacy arguments through your own research?" We worked on it together." "No, Harrison," I said firmly, "you've never worked on anything together. You've never contributed an original legal thought to any case. You've been a conduit for my work, nothing more." I pulled out the most damning evidence of all, the digital forensics analysis I had commissioned from a cybersecurity firm specializing in intellectual property cases. This is a complete analysis of Harrison's computer activity on the shared drive we used for casework. It shows every keystroke, every edit, every contribution made to these case files. The analysis was devastating. It showed that Harrison's contributions to his own cases were limited to changing fonts and formatting, correcting basic spelling and grammar errors, adding and removing commas, rearranging paragraphs I had written, copy-pasting my work into court filing templates. The substantive legal content, every argument, every case citation, every constitutional analysis came from my work sessions, clearly documented by timestamp and user activity logs. Richard Stone was now taking furious notes. "Ms. Rosewood, this forensic analysis suggests that Mr. Thornfield contributed virtually nothing to the intellectual content of these cases." "Because he contributed nothing," I said. "Harrison Thornfield is a fraud who has been coasting on my work for 3 years. I turned to Harrison, who was slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. "Harrison, would you like to explain to your supervisors how you plan to handle the Valdez versus City Council case? You know, the one you're scheduled to argue next week, the one where the brief is due tomorrow?" His face went completely white. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "You can't," I continued, "because without my work, you have no idea how to approach that case. You don't understand the constitutional issues involved, you can't develop legal arguments, and you certainly can't write a brief that will survive judicial scrutiny." Mr. Wellington stood up abruptly, his face flush with anger. "Mr. Thornfield, are you telling me that the brief for the Valdez case, a case worth $2.3 million in fees to this firm, doesn't exist? I was gonna ask Camilla to help me with the research." "Help you?" Diana Foster's voice rose. "Mr. Thornfield, according to this evidence, Ms. Rosewood doesn't help you with research. She does all of your legal work while you take credit for it." I stood up and closed my laptop. Which brings us to the reason I'm here today. I'm formally notifying this firm that I will no longer be providing uncredited legal services to Harrison Thornfield. Effective immediately, he will need to handle his caseload using his own legal expertise. The implication hung in the air like a sword. Without my work, Harrison had no legal expertise to draw upon. Mr. Wellington turned to Harrison with the look of a man who had just realized he'd been catastrophically deceived.
Mr. Thornfield, you have exactly 1 hour to provide me with a satisfactory explanation for this situation, and you better pray that we can figure out how to handle the Valdez case before we lose the client and face a malpractice lawsuit. As I packed up my evidence, Diana Foster approached me. Ms. Rosewood, I need to ask, what do you want from this firm? I want proper attribution for my work. I want acknowledgement that every case that built Harrison's reputation was authored by me, and I want this firm to understand that they've been evaluating and promoting the wrong person. And professionally, she pressed, are you interested in discussing employment opportunities here?
I smiled as I picked up my banker's box. Miss Foster, after today, I suspect I'll have better offers than anything this firm could provide. But thank you for asking. As I walked toward the elevator, I could hear raised voices behind me. Harrison was finally being forced to account for 3 years of deception, while his supervisors realized that their star associate was actually an intellectual property thief. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, leaving behind the wreckage of Harrison's fraudulent career. In 2 hours, I had a meeting with Judge Fairmont. By the end of the day, the entire legal community would know exactly who Camilla Rosewood was, and exactly who Harrison Thornfield wasn't. By the time I reached Judge Fairmont's chambers in the federal courthouse, word of Harrison's implosion at Sterling & Associates had already reached the judicial community. Rebecca, Judge Fairmont's clerk, greeted me with an expression that was part amazement, part respect, and part concern. Miss Rosewood, she said as she led me through the marble corridors of the courthouse, I have to tell you, the phones haven't stopped ringing since word got out about your meetings today. Judge Martinez from the Second Circuit called asking if you'd be interested in a clerkship. Professor Williams from Yale wants to discuss a visiting fellowship. Constitutional Defense Group in New York is flying someone in tomorrow specifically to meet with you. Word travels fast in legal circles, I observed. Though I wasn't entirely surprised, the constitutional law community was remarkably interconnected. Faster than you know, Judge Fairmont has been fielding calls all afternoon from colleagues who want to verify what they've heard. Apparently, some very prominent legal minds feel they've been misled about the true authorship of work they've been citing and praising. We arrived at Judge Fairmont's office, an impressive chamber lined with leather-bound law books and adorned with photos of her swearing-in ceremony. Judge Fairmont herself was a petite woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything and miss nothing. She rose from behind her desk as I entered, extending her hand with the kind of firm grip that spoke of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Miss Rosewood, she said as she entered, please have a seat. I think we have quite a lot to discuss. I placed my final banker's box on the chair beside me and pulled out what had become my most convincing evidence, the comprehensive digital analysis that proved beyond any doubt that Harrison's celebrated career was built entirely on my work. Judge Fairmont, before we begin, I want to thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I know this situation is highly unusual. Unusual is an understatement, she replied, settling back in her chair. Miss Rosewood, I've been praising Harrison Thornfield's constitutional analysis for 2 years. I've cited his work in 3 of my own opinions. I've recommended him for positions based on what I believed was his legal expertise. Are you telling me that I've been fundamentally wrong about who authored that work? You weren't wrong about the quality of the work, Your Honor. You were just wrong about who created it. I opened my laptop and displayed the Morrison case analysis that had first caught Judge Fairmont's attention. This religious freedom argument that you cited in Patterson versus School District, every word of it came from my research and analysis. Harrison's only contribution was adding his name to my brief. Judge Fairmont studied the side-by-side comparison with the focused attention of someone who had spent decades evaluating legal arguments. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she absorbed the evidence. Miss Rosewood, this is extraordinary. Not just the documentation you've provided, but the quality of the original work.
This constitutional analysis is genuinely sophisticated, graduate-level scholarship, not the kind of work I'd expect from someone just a few years out of law school. Because it wasn't from someone just a few years out of law school. It was from someone who had been consulting with the country's leading constitutional experts to develop innovative legal theories. I showed her the email correspondence with Professor Williams at Yale, Dr. Chen at Stanford, and experts at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Her eyes widened as she read exchanges where leading scholars were discussing complex constitutional theory with me, not Harrison. You've been working directly with Robert Chen on privacy rights theory? He's one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the country. Dr. Chen has been mentoring me for a year. He believes my approach to digital privacy rights could reshape how courts handle Fourth Amendment issues in the digital age. But he thinks he's been corresponding with the brilliant legal mind behind the Chen versus Digital Corp case, which the entire legal community attributes to Harrison. Judge Fairmont sat back in her chair, the full scope of the deception becoming clear. Miss Rosewood, do you understand what you're telling me? You're saying that some of the most innovative constitutional thinking of the past 3 years, work that has influenced federal court decisions and shaped legal precedent, was authored by a law student who hasn't even graduated yet?
A law student who turned down Harvard Law School to stay in Meridian City and support what she thought was a partnership with the man she loved. The judge was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. Miss Rosewood, why did you allow this to continue for so long? Why didn't you seek proper attribution for your work? Because I was manipulated by someone I trusted completely. Harrison convinced me that we were building something together, that my contributions would be recognized when we opened our joint practice. He made me believe that my work was our work, and that his success was our success. But surely you must have realized that your name wasn't appearing on any of this groundbreaking scholarship. Your Honor, I was 24 years old and in love with a man who told me every day that he couldn't succeed without me. When someone you trust completely tells you that your behind-the-scenes contributions are just as valuable as public recognition, you want to believe them, especially when they promise that recognition is coming once you're married and practicing law together. Judge Fairmont nodded slowly. And now? Now I know that recognition was never coming. Harrison never intended to share credit for my work. He was content to let me remain invisible while he built a career on my intellectual property. I pulled out the recording of Harrison asking me to explain substantive due process, the same recording that had devastated his credibility at Sterling and Associates. Judge Fairmont listened with growing dismay as Harrison's voice revealed his fundamental lack of understanding of basic constitutional principles. "This is deeply troubling," she said when the recording ended. "Miss Rosewood, I've been considering Mr. Thornfield for a clerkship position. Based on this evidence, I need to ask, in your professional opinion, does Harrison Thornfield possess the legal expertise necessary to serve as a federal law clerk?" Your Honor, based on 3 years of first-hand observation, Harrison Thornfield couldn't draft a competent legal memo without substantial assistance. He doesn't understand complex constitutional theory, he can't develop original legal arguments, and he lacks the analytical skills necessary for federal court work. Judge Fairmont was making notes as I spoke. "Miss Rosewood, what would happen if I offered Harrison Thornfield a clerkship position and he accepted?" He would either fail spectacularly or he would find some other person to exploit for their legal expertise. Harrison is incapable of producing the quality of work that made him attractive to you in the first place. The judge set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Miss Rosewood, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. What do you want to achieve by revealing this information? Are you seeking revenge against Mr. Thornfield for his personal betrayal? Or are you genuinely concerned about professional integrity in the legal community?" I considered her question carefully. "Judge Fairmont, 3 days ago, I might have said this was about revenge, but sitting here now,
Having spent the day documenting systematic intellectual property theft, I realize this is about something much more important. This is about ensuring that legal positions, opportunities, and recognition go to people who actually deserve them based on their own merit. And personally? Personally, I want the legal community to know who I really am. For 3 years, I've been hiding my light under Harrison's bushel. I want the chance to build my own career on my own work, with my name attached to my own achievements. Judge Fairmont stood and walked to her window, looking out over the courthouse plaza, where law students and attorneys hurried between buildings, pursuing their own legal careers. "Miss Rosewood," she said, without turning around, "what you've shown me today represents one of the most significant cases of professional fraud I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. But it also represents some of the most promising legal scholarship I've seen from an emerging attorney." She turned back to face me. "I'm going to make some calls this afternoon. The legal community needs to know the truth about Harrison Thornfield's work, and more importantly, they need to know about Camilla Rosewood's capabilities." As I prepared to leave, Judge Fairmont handed me her card. "Miss Rosewood, when you graduate next month, call my office. I think we should discuss your future in constitutional law." Walking down the courthouse steps, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had spent the day systematically dismantling Harrison's fraudulent career while simultaneously introducing the legal community to my actual capabilities. By tomorrow, everyone who mattered in constitutional law would know that the brilliant legal mind they had been admiring belonged to me, not Harrison. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one final confrontation waiting, with the family that had celebrated my betrayal just 3 days earlier.
Miss Rosewood. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "I believe we need to have a conversation. Would you be available to meet this evening?" "Of course, Your Honor. Where would you like to meet?" "My study at home. I think this conversation requires privacy." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Justice Nathaniel Thornfield in the same estate where, just 3 days earlier, he had called me Justice without knowing how prophetic those words would be. But this time, the power dynamic was completely different. This time, I wasn't the heartbroken ex-fiancé seeking closure. I was the woman who had just exposed his son as a fraud. Justice Thornfield's study was exactly what you'd expect from a Supreme Court justice. Floor-to-ceiling law books, prestigious awards, photos with presidents and legal luminaries. But tonight, he looked every one of his 68 years, sitting behind his massive oak desk with the weight of his son's deception pressing down on him. "Miss Rosewood," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "I've spent the afternoon fielding calls from colleagues across the country. Judge Martinez, Judge Fairmont, Dean Chen from Stanford, Professor Williams from Yale, all asking me if I knew that my son's celebrated legal work was actually authored by you." "And what did you tell them?" "That I was as shocked as they were." "But Miss Rosewood, I need to hear this from you directly. Did my son really steal 3 years of your work?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on his desk. "Your Honor, would you like to hear Harrison explain constitutional law concepts in his own words?" I played the recording where Harrison asked me to explain substantive due process, the same recording that had destroyed his credibility everywhere else. Justice Thornfield's face grew more pained with each confused question his son asked. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Miss Rosewood, I've spent the Supreme Court for 16 years. I've written opinions that have shaped constitutional law, and my own son doesn't understand the basic principles I've spent my career defending." "Your Honor, I think Harrison understands legal concepts when they're explained to him. He's not unintelligent, but he lacks the ability to develop original legal arguments or engage in complex constitutional analysis. Without someone else's work to present, he's just another mediocre lawyer."
Justice Thornfield stood and walked to his window, looking out over the estate grounds where his son's engagement party had been held. Miss Rosewood, do you understand what this means for my family? For my reputation? I've been praising my son's work to colleagues, recommending him for positions, using my influence to advance his career, all based on work that wasn't his. Your Honor, respectfully, your son's fraud isn't your fault. You couldn't have known he was presenting someone else's work as his own. He turned back to face me. But I should have known. I'm his father. I should have recognized that the sophisticated legal thinking in his cases was beyond his capabilities. Did you ever discuss his cases with him directly? Ask him to walk you through his legal reasoning? Justice Thornfield was quiet for a long moment. No, Harrison always said he preferred to keep family time separate from work discussions. He said talking about cases would make family dinners feel like legal conferences. Or maybe he knew he couldn't discuss legal theory he didn't understand with the one person who would immediately recognize his lack of comprehension. The justice sat back down heavily. Miss Rosewood, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. How much of Harrison's success came from your work? All of it. Every case that built his reputation, every argument that impressed his supervisors, every piece of analysis that caught the attention of the legal community, I authored all of it. The Morrison case that made him famous? Mine. The Chen privacy rights case that got him featured in Legal Tribune? Mine. The Rodriguez municipal law case that won him the Young Lawyers Award? Mine. Justice Thornfield closed his eyes. Dear God, Miss Rosewood, do you realize that I've been citing my son's work in my own Supreme Court opinions? I referenced the Morrison case arguments in my religious freedom opinion last year. I quoted the Chen case analysis in a privacy rights dissent. I've been unknowingly citing your work from the highest court in the land. The full irony of the situation hit me. Not only had Harrison stolen my work and used it to build his career, but that work had been so influential that it had shaped Supreme Court jurisprudence through his father's opinions. Your Honor, I'm honored that my legal analysis was worthy of Supreme Court consideration, even if it reached the court through unconventional channels. Miss Rosewood, this is a catastrophe. Harrison's career is finished. No law firm will hire him once word spreads about this fraud. But more than that, every case he's touched, every argument he's made, every client he's represented, all of it is tainted by this deception. I could see the weight of realization crushing him. His son wasn't just a fraud. He was a fraud whose deception had infected high-profile cases and prestigious legal institutions.
Your Honor, there's something else you should know. Sterling & Associates is facing potential malpractice liability because Harrison is scheduled to argue a major case next week, and he has no idea how to handle it without my assistance. The Valdez case? You know about it? Marcus Wellington called me this afternoon in a panic. He said Harrison couldn't explain his legal strategy for the case and seemed incapable of completing the brief that's due tomorrow. Marcus asked if I thought Harrison might be having some kind of mental breakdown. He's not having a breakdown. He's just being forced to practice law without my invisible support for the first time in 3 years. Justice Thornfield was quiet for several minutes, processing the full scope of his son's deception. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been respect. Ms. Rosewood, I owe you an apology. 3 days ago, I called you Justice without understanding the irony of those words. You weren't just the wronged party in a romantic triangle. You were the victim of systematic intellectual property theft by my own son. Your Honor, you don't owe me an apology. You couldn't have known. But I should have known my son better. I should have recognized that his sudden legal brilliance was suspicious. I should have questioned how someone who struggled through law school suddenly became a constitutional law prodigy. He
he stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound volume. "Ms. Rosewood, this is my first published law review article from 30 years ago. It took me 6 months to research and write. It was agony. Every legal theory had to be carefully developed, every argument meticulously crafted. That's what real legal scholarship looks like. It's difficult, time-consuming, and intellectually exhausting." Harrison made it look easy because he wasn't doing the work. Exactly. And I was so proud of what I thought was his natural brilliance that I never questioned how he could produce sophisticated constitutional analysis so effortlessly. Justice Thornfield returned to his desk and opened a leather portfolio. "Ms. Rosewood, I need to tell you something. 2 weeks ago, I recommended Harrison for a Supreme Court clerkship position. I spoke personally to Justice Roberts about my son's exceptional constitutional law expertise." My heart stopped. "You recommended Harrison for a Supreme Court clerkship position? Based on work that was actually yours? Ms. Rosewood, do you understand what this means? If Harrison had been selected for that position, he would have been participating in Supreme Court decisions while possessing no actual understanding of constitutional law. The integrity of the court itself would have been compromised." The magnitude of what had almost happened was staggering. Harrison, armed with my stolen work, had almost secured one of the most prestigious and influential positions in American law. "Your Honor, what are you going to do about the recommendation?" "I'm going to call Justice Roberts tomorrow morning and withdraw it. And then I'm going to do something I've never done in my entire career. I'm going to recommend someone who isn't my son for a position they actually deserve." He looked directly at me. "Ms. Rosewood, would you be interested in a Supreme Court clerkship position?" The room seemed to spin. 3 days ago, I had been the forgotten woman at my sister's engagement party. Now a Supreme Court justice was offering me the most coveted position in American law. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Ms. Rosewood, your constitutional analysis is already influencing Supreme Court decisions. It's time for you to be properly credited for work that's worthy of the highest court in the land." As I left the Thornfield estate that evening, I realized that the power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely reversed. Harrison had lost everything he'd stolen from me, while I had gained recognition for work that had always been mine. But the most satisfying part wasn't Harrison's downfall. It was finally being seen for who I had always been, not his invisible assistant, but a constitutional law scholar worthy of the Supreme Court itself. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The legal community worked fast when it came to scandal, and by sunrise, everyone who mattered in constitutional law knew the truth about Harrison Thornfield and about me. But the call that mattered most came at 8 a.m. from Dr. Blackwater. "Camilla," her voice was vibrating with excitement, "I've never seen anything like this. Harvard Law School wants to offer you a full scholarship to transfer and complete your final semester there. Yale wants to discuss a joint JD/PhD program in constitutional law. Stanford is offering you a research fellowship. And that's just this morning's calls." "Professor, it's overwhelming." "It's justice, Camilla. This is what should have happened 3 years ago when your work first started making waves in the legal community." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Harrison was probably hiding in his apartment, watching his career collapse, I was fielding offers from the most prestigious legal institutions in the country. At 10 a.m., there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my parents and Delphine standing in the hallway, looking like they hadn't slept. My mother's eyes were red from crying. My father looked 10 years older. And Delphine looked completely lost. "Camilla," my mother said, her voice breaking, "we need to talk."
I led them into my small living room, where the morning sun was streaming through windows that had never seemed so bright. We sat in the same configuration we'd use for family meetings when I was a child, except this time, I wasn't the one who needed to explain myself. "Honey," my father began, his voice careful, "Delphine told us about your conversation yesterday, about Harrison's work actually being your work. We need to understand what's really been happening." I looked at my sister, who was staring at her hands. "What did Harrison tell you, Delphine?" She looked up, and I was shocked to see genuine pain in her eyes. Not the manipulative tears I'd expected, but real anguish. "He told me everything. Last night, after his father called him home, he broke down completely. He admitted that every case that made him successful was really your work. He said he's been lying to everyone, including me, for 3 years. And how does that make you feel? Like I stole a man who didn't actually exist." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Camilla, I fell in love with his success, his intelligence, his legal brilliance. I thought I was taking someone extraordinary away from you, but none of it was real." My mother reached for my hand. "Camilla, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you explain what was really happening?" "Because I thought you wouldn't believe me. Because Harrison was charming and successful and from a prominent family, and I was just the girlfriend who helped with research. Who was going to believe that I was the real legal mind behind his career?" "We would have believed you," my father said firmly. "We should have believed you. We should have asked more questions about why you were always working on his cases, why you never seemed to have time for your own schoolwork anymore." Delphine stood up abruptly and walked to my window. "Camilla, I have something to tell you, and I don't know how to say it." "Just say it." "Harrison asked me to marry him because he thought I could replace you. Not romantically, professionally. He knew you were getting close to graduation, and he was terrified that you'd start demanding credit for your work. He thought if he married someone else, you'd back away quietly rather than cause drama that might hurt your sister." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Harrison hadn't just stolen my work. He'd stolen my sister as a strategic move to ensure my continued silence. "He told you this?" "Last night, when everything was falling apart, he said marrying me was supposed to be his insurance policy against you ever exposing him." Delphine turned back to face me, tears streaming down her face. "Camilla, I wasn't just complicit in stealing your fiancé, I was an unwitting accomplice in stealing your entire future." My mother was crying now too. "Camilla, what can we do? How can we make this right?" I looked around the room at my family, the people who had celebrated my betrayal just 4 days earlier, who were now sitting in my apartment asking for my forgiveness. A week ago, I would have done anything to hear those words. But now, sitting here with Supreme Court clerkship offers on my phone and the entire legal community finally knowing my name, I realized something important. "I don't need you to make this right," I said gently. "I already did that myself." I pulled out my phone and showed them the messages I had been receiving all morning. Offers from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, a personal invitation from Judge Fairmont to discuss federal clerkship opportunities, a call from the American Bar Association asking me to speak at their annual convention about intellectual property protection for young lawyers. "Camilla," Delphine whispered, "these are incredible opportunities. They're the opportunities I should have had 3 years ago, before Harrison convinced me to hide my light under his bushel." My father was reading the messages with growing amazement. "Honey, Justice Thornfield recommended you for a Supreme Court clerkship? Harrison's own father called me last night to apologize for his son's fraud and offer me the position Harrison had been recommended for. The irony is almost perfect. The man who called me justice at your engagement party ended up being the one to actually deliver it." We sat in silence for minutes, the weight of the past few days settling over all of us. Finally, Delphine spoke. "Camilla, what's going to happen to Harrison? That's not my concern anymore. But if you're asking as someone who just discovered the man she was going to marry as a fraud, I'd suggest you think very carefully about what kind of future you can build with someone whose entire career was based on lies." "I already called off the engagement," she said quietly, "this morning. I told him I couldn't marry someone I didn't actually know."
I felt something I hadn't expected, a pang of sympathy for my sister. She had been manipulated too, just in a different way. Delphina, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you love Harrison, or do you love who you thought he was? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know the difference anymore. Then you have your answer.
My mother stood up and walked over to me. Camilla, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me. We failed you. As parents, as family, we failed to see what was happening right in front of us. We failed to protect you from someone who was exploiting your generosity and your love. Mom, no, let me finish. We were so impressed by Harrison's success that we never questioned where it came from. We were so happy that you were with someone successful that we never asked if you were happy. We celebrated your sister's engagement to your ex-fiancé without ever considering what that meant for you. My father joined her. Camilla, we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we want you to know that we're proud of you. Not for what you achieved for Harrison, but for who you are, for what you've accomplished on your own. I looked at my family, really looked at them, and realized that this moment was a choice. I could hold on to the hurt, the years of being overlooked and undervalued, or I could accept that sometimes people need to see you lose everything before they understand what you were worth all along. I forgive you, I said simply. All of you. But I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who was desperate for your approval. I don't need you to be proud of me anymore. I'm proud of myself. Delphine walked over and sat beside me. Camilla, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but can we start over as sisters? Not as competitors, not as people fighting over the same man, just as sisters. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but finding only genuine remorse and hope. We can try, but it has to be real this time. No more competition, no more comparing ourselves to each other, and definitely no more sharing men. For the first time in years, Delphine laughed, really laughed. Deal. Although I have to say, your taste in men led to a much better career outcome than mine did. As my family prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. Camilla, what are you going to do about all these opportunities? Harvard, Yale, the Supreme Court? I smiled, thinking about the woman I'd been 4 days ago. Invisible, undervalued, desperate for recognition from people who had never deserved my brilliance. I'm going to choose the option that lets me be exactly who I've always been, a constitutional law scholar worthy of the highest court in the land, and this time, my name will be on everything I create. As the door closed behind them, I realized that this wasn't really an ending, it was a beginning. Harrison had stolen 3 years of my work, but in doing so, he'd also given me something invaluable. The knowledge that I was capable of excellence that would eventually demand recognition. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally coming to light. And my light, hidden for so long, was about to shine brighter than anyone had ever imagined. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office at the Supreme Court of the United States, drafting a memo on digital privacy rights for Justice Roberts, when my phone buzzed with a text from Delphine. Saw your byline in Constitutional Law Quarterly. Mom framed it and put it on the mantle where Harrison's engagement photo used to be. We're all so proud. I smiled, looking around my office, with my name on the door, in the most prestigious legal institution in America. The Supreme Court clerkship had exceeded every expectation I ever had for my career. Working directly with the justices, contributing to decisions that would shape constitutional law for generations, finally using my mind to its full potential. It was everything I had dreamed of those lonely nights ghostwriting Harrison's briefs. The transformation had been remarkable, not just for me, but for everyone involved in the wreckage of Harrison's fraudulent career. Justice Thornfield had become one of my strongest mentors, often telling colleagues that discovering the truth about his son's deception had led him to one of the most brilliant legal minds he'd ever encountered.
The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Harrison's fraud had ultimately brought his father and I together in a professional relationship that was reshaping both of our careers. Dr. Blackwater had been invited to present our collaborative research on constitutional privacy rights at the International Law Conference in Geneva. Professor Williams from Yale was co-authoring a law review article with me about digital rights jurisprudence. Constitutional Defense Group had offered me a senior associate position for after my clerkship ended, with my name prominently featured on their letterhead.
But perhaps the most satisfying transformation had been watching myself reclaim my own voice. In law school, I had been tentative, always second-guessing myself after years of channeling my thoughts through Harrison. Now, in Supreme Court conference meetings, I spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her ideas were valuable. When justices asked for my analysis, I didn't hesitate to offer insights that were genuinely my own. Last month, Justice Roberts had cited my privacy rights memo in a majority opinion that would protect digital civil liberties for millions of Americans. Seeing my legal reasoning, properly attributed to research conducted by Supreme Court clerk Camilla Rosewood, published in the official Supreme Court reports, was a moment I'd treasure forever. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Rebecca, Judge Fairmont's former clerk, who had become a good friend and professional colleague. "Camilla, have you seen today's Legal Tribune?" "No, why?" Page 3. There's an article about Sterling and Associates settling a major malpractice lawsuit related to the Valdez case. Apparently, they couldn't find anyone competent to handle the work after Harrison left. I pulled up the article on my computer. Sterling and Associates had indeed settled the Valdez case for an undisclosed amount after failing to file an adequate brief. The article noted that the firm had undergone significant personnel changes following discrepancies in work attribution involving a former associate. Harrison's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in the legal community knew the story. He had quietly left Meridian City 6 months ago, reportedly taking a position at a small personal injury firm in a distant state where his reputation hadn't followed him. Delphine had heard from mutual acquaintances that he was struggling with basic legal work, finally being forced to develop skills he should have learned years ago. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that justice had been served and that no more clients would suffer from his incompetence. My computer chimed with an email from Harvard Law School. "Dear Miss Rosewood, we would be honored to offer you a visiting professorship in constitutional law for the upcoming academic year. Your recent scholarship has been groundbreaking, and we believe your perspective would be invaluable to our students." I was still processing the offer when another email arrived, this one from the American Bar Association. "Miss Rosewood, we would like to invite you to deliver the keynote address at our annual convention on protecting intellectual property in legal practice. Your experience and expertise make you the ideal speaker for this critical topic." It was almost overwhelming. The opportunities, the recognition, the respect from legal minds I had admired for years. But what struck me most was how natural it all felt. This wasn't luck or charity. These opportunities were coming to me because I had finally stopped hiding my abilities and started demonstrating what I was truly capable of. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from my mother. "Camilla, your father and I are driving down to D.C. next weekend for the Kennedy Gala. We'd love to take you to dinner and hear about your work. We want to understand what our brilliant daughter is accomplishing." The word brilliant made me smile. It had taken my family witnessing Harrison's complete professional collapse for them to recognize what had been in front of them all along. But better late than never. Another text came from Delphine. "Also, I started law school, part-time program at Meridian University. Dr. Blackwater is my advisor. She says I have potential, but that I need to learn to value my own work instead of comparing myself to others. Apparently, she learned something about that from watching you." That evening, I stood on the steps of the Supreme Court as the sun set over Washington, D.C., looking up at the words carved in marble above the entrance. Equal justice under law.
For 3 years, I had been denied equal treatment for my work, equal recognition for my contributions, equal respect for my abilities. But justice, as it turned out, had a way of correcting itself when the truth finally came to light. My phone rang one last time. It was Justice Thornfield. "Camilla, I just wanted to call and tell you how proud I am of the memo you drafted on the Morrison precedent. It's some of the finest constitutional analysis I've read in 30 years on the bench." "Thank you, Justice Thornfield. That means everything coming from you." "Camilla, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret how everything happened? The pain, the betrayal, the years of being unrecognized?" I thought about his question as I watched tourists taking pictures in front of the Supreme Court, probably never imagining that one of the youngest clerks in the court's history was standing just a few feet away. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret any of it. If Harrison hadn't betrayed me, I might have spent my entire career being his invisible partner. His deception forced me to finally value my own work enough to fight for it. In a way, he gave me the greatest gift possible, the realization that I didn't need anyone else's permission to be brilliant. And now?
Now I get to be exactly who I always was, but with my name on everything I create. Now I get to inspire other young lawyers to protect their intellectual property and demand proper recognition for their work. Now I get to sit in the highest court in the land and help shape constitutional law for future generations. As I walked down the marble steps toward my car, I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago. Invisible, undervalued, desperate for love from people who couldn't see her worth. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who knew her value and demanded that others recognize it too. I had learned the most important lesson of my legal career. Justice isn't just a concept we study in law books or pursue in courtrooms. Sometimes justice is simply the truth finally being told by the person brave enough to tell it. And sometimes the people who tried to steal your light end up showing the world just how brightly you were meant to shine. My name is Camilla Rosewood. I am a constitutional law scholar, a Supreme Court clerk, and a woman who refused to remain invisible. And if you're watching this, remember, your work belongs to you, your brilliance belongs to you, and your future belongs to you. All you have to do is be brave enough to claim it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.